So hear a good word today. God is still God and has the same hopes for you. Whenever people need to be reminded of this fact in the Bible, God sends prophets. Prophets are not fortune tellers per se. They are instead truth tellers who offer the people of Israel a choice. They often bring a message from God about where God is hoping to go. They have one eye on where they're going and one eye on what is the current situation for Israel. And so these prophets encourage Israel to make choices, to turn away from things that keep them from being godly and turning towards God and those things that will make them godly. One such prophet that's been really hard for me to shake lately is Amos. Amos was a shepherd and a farmer by trade. He was kind of an outsider. But when he prophesied in Israel, he brought a flavor of prophecy that even today still shapes the way we hear prophecies. So Amos shared a hard message. The book of Amos in the Bible brings some pretty stern rebuke for Israel. Now, what's strange about that is that Israel was in a time of general stability when Amos was prophesying. It was actually more at peace than perhaps it had been in a really long time. But Amos knew something that we would do well to remember, that God is still God, and that God's hopes are still the same for us. See, Amos believed that Israel could, in their complacency, they could forget about God. They could forget about God's justice and God's righteousness, that they could forget about the division between the wealthy and the impoverished. Amos has a good word for us today. It is a good word. I want to read Amos chapter 5, verses 21 through 24. And this is what it says. It says, I despise your festivals, and I take no delight in your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me your burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. And the offerings of well-being of your fatted animals, I will not look upon. Take away from me the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the melody of your harps. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Amos looks at Israel and he presents them a choice. He says, look, you can continue in your hypocritical worship, or you can turn to God and the things that matter to God, the things that truly matter. It isn't that God doesn't love music, or that God doesn't love celebration, or God doesn't love people, sharing parties and having a great time, or even making sacrifices. But those things, Amos says, are secondary to righteousness and to justice. In fact, without justice and righteousness, worship for Israel is an affront to God. If we neglect these things, then it turns everything else away. Let me be clear. I don't believe that Amos is saying that the church should not worship together, or trying to say that we should not be doing creative things to try to worship in this present world that we live in. I believe that Amos, for all of his harshness, he really is only offering a message of hope to Israel. He believes that they can change, that they can put the right thing right. And I believe that we can too. See, once Israel is concerned primarily about righteousness and about justice, then their worship will be godly again. And the same is true for us. That has always been true. God is still God and still has the same hopes for us. I look forward to the day that we can worship again. Who doesn't, right? That's something to look forward to. But I also look forward, with Amos, to a day when our church will put righteousness and justice, a day when the people of the church, those who call ourselves followers of Christ, will look for justice and righteousness to not just be streams in our lives, but to be the rivers of water that will feed the streams of worship that we experience. It should be that way, not the other way around. God is still loving us towards that world. You can look in Matthew 15 at an example of this shift. Jesus in Matthew 15 answers the question some people pose to him about what is it that God desires. And Jesus, he quotes another prophet. He quotes Isaiah 29 to these people. And he says, you guys, you're the epitome of this scripture, where it says that you honor God with your lips, but your hearts are far from him. Maybe out of frustration, Jesus leaves these self-righteous people and he goes off into a far land, Tyre and Sidon. And it's there actually that Jesus interacts with a Canaanite woman who surprises him. She shows incredible faith. And in verse 28 of Matthew 15, Jesus says, "Woman, great is your faith." This outsider, this person who isn't Jewish, shows the faith that Jesus longed for and wished for in Israel. After that, in Matthew 15, Jesus returns back towards the Sea of Galilee, comes back into Israel, and he is energized by this woman's testimony, by her belief. He heals the sick, feeds the hungry, brings sight to the blind, to help the lame walk. Justice and righteousness return. I pray that's how it will be in our lives. Hear a good word today. God is still God and still has the same hopes for us that have always been there. My prayer is that if we can get justice and righteousness correct, then we will get our worship correct. God is still God and has these hopes for us. May we see that justice and may we see that mercy as a part of our lives and a part of our church and a part of our world, because it will make God happy. Praise be to God. Amen.